And welcome to the F-World podcast, where we explore the forces of fragility and how they affect our everyday lives with guests from around the world. Today's episode will focus in on a cross-cutting theme that is getting a lot more prominence in international development and is being called the transformative opportunity of our time, digitalization. As we know, digital technologies and platforms play greater and greater roles in our lives and also in addressing global challenges, responding to shocks, creating jobs, expanding access to finance, improving efficiency of public administration, and much, much more. And while many of us take internet access for granted, 2.6 billion people remain offline, and the vast majority of them are in low and middle income countries. And if we don't address this is potentially something that will exacerbate the digital divide, further skew growth in favor of high-income countries, and exacerbate poverty and possibly fragility as well. Needless to say, an in-depth conversation on this topic is far overdue, and luckily, as our guide on this, we have Philippe Vogeleer. Philippe is a non-executive board professional focused really on getting people to work together on digital development, or what we might call a one-man think and do tank. Until about March this year, he was the global head of corporate business development for Vodafone, where he shaped alliances and partnerships to deliver digital solutions to Vodafone's over 300 million customers in over 125 countries. But without further ado, I'll let him talk more about his background and interests and professional career. Thanks so much for joining us today, Philippe.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Greetings from a non-professional setup. I'm in the Alps, but I'm delighted to talk to you from here with a bit of high altitude to give a different context.
We're looking forward to that high altitude perspective. Could you just, start off as we normally do with giving us a bit of a flavor of the experiences and ideas that have shaped your career and your path to date?
Well, I guess to be fair, I have to start with the start, which is usually family. I come from a very international family. You have to think about people, each generation marrying into different people from different places, and you end up with this wonderful melting pot of presence in different regions of the world. So I heard about international since pretty much always. My parents are doctors. They were already involved into human development when I was a child, so that as well shaped my understanding of the world, that things were not the same for everybody, unfortunately, and that there was a lot we could do to make that better. For the rest, pretty straightforward European type of curriculum. I might want to reassure your listeners by saying that I wasn't born with a vocation or something. My parents knew at age 12 each that they wanted to be doctors. I didn't at all. I had the chance when I was a teenager to live in Colorado at some stage and to meet a fantastic lawyer. Hi, John, who basically showed me what law was in practice. And that led me to decide to register into law school. And then, you're talking about a million years ago, the 1980s and 90s, where mobile phones came to life. And for whatever reason, which I still can't explain to you today, I got convinced pretty rapidly that they would change the world and that I had to go into that field. So I started specializing first in business law, then in ICT law, then going into media, then going into business administration, which essentially taught me how to read and write to be able to bring things to life. So not just having concepts, but really being able to put them on paper and then develop them. The rest is pretty much history. I did a mini thesis on the coming together of mobile phone and satellite technology. My thesis was that they were going to join at some stage, which did happen probably 15 years later than what I had predicted, but that's all right. Key point is that you come to this realization that the earth is very big, and therefore you will need to bring stuff to all corners of it if you want it to work. And then you need to look at what are the technologies that can really make that happen. And then this combination works. That thesis led me to be recruited as a student by a consulting house who was interested by selling that concept to some of its clients, which led me to serve European clients first in myriads of countries, then be hired by one of my clients, Orange, to help them on negotiations in Europe. I then expressed my deep interest for emerging markets, was sent first to MBA and then to the Middle East to head strategy. After 10 years doing covering the Arab League, I basically decided to bring my family to London after a wonderful house, Vodafone, offered me to join them at the holding company level. A bit of correction, Johan, on what you said. The company has much more than 300 million clients. It has 300 million clients in Europe alone. It has another 200 and something in Africa, plus about 300 in India. So it's a mega conglomerate. But because of different structures and reporting, the number you gave is fairly public. Plain reality is that there is much more. It delivers services indeed in about 125 different countries. It is a very large cable provider for communications around the world after having bought cable and wireless, etc. So it's pretty much a giant of telecoms. I already joined as a janitor, to be completely transparent. The company was having, as it comes with the size of it, was having issues in different countries. I had lots of boots on the ground experience from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. So I would sniff when something was wrong, why it was going wrong. So I was literally shipped around the world for about 5 years to whenever something would happen to say what actually happened, how do we fix it, etc. Which is pretty much the best school I ever had, because you can't beat practice. Being parachuted anywhere and being asked to in a few days say what is going on here is fantastic learning. Stroke of luck is basically that at some stage, one of my main clients, who was in charge of the international division of Vodafone, became CFO. Then he became CEO. I followed essentially, and at some stage he offered me to offer an advisory service to the whole company with my team, and then at some stage to start doing business development ourselves, so that we would try to avoid bumping on the same stones that we had bumped in the past, and again accelerate development. So that's in a long nutshell my journey, really.
So that's absolutely wonderful, and I actually think you're in the best position to answer this question from your perspective, because you have been working through the decades, right? What has been the big business opportunity in ICT, in mobile, in telecom, in each of these decades? Because we tend to forget that, especially if we haven't experienced those decades as you have, we have to understand sort of what's the path that got us here where we are today. So what has been sort of the big business opportunity in each one of these decades?
Well, look, when I was a child or a teenager, my father had one of these Motorola phones, which was literally a suitcase with a handset on it. And that got miniaturized, and then it got into everybody's pocket. I think the honest answer is, first and foremost, to consider really openly that telecom is a byproduct of society. So essentially, when society go up, people have opportunities to use new services, and telecom is one of them. So it's extremely important to lift up entire societies. Second part is to understand the difference between signals, which is transmission of radio, if you want, equipment, which is the fact of having handsets or computers, etc., and then services. A lot of people make a big soup of those. So to answer your question, if you look at the 1980s to 2000, you're talking about the liberal order. Essentially, it's the end of the Soviet Union. It's the liberal order coming through. Everybody believes that, freedom is going to arrive everywhere. And to a certain extent, you could say that all the start of liberalization of the telecom markets with private players coming is a byproduct of that. There was this view that it was much easier to ask, or much more efficient to ask the private sector to develop telephony. And it did. So, I joined the mobile phone industry to change the world, and we have changed the world. Look at how many of you will have one or more phones in your pocket. So that's the 1980s, 1990s type of thing. Then you get to, the Yale has done a lot of studies on that, onto how we went from this age of liberalism to an age of a bit less trust into the system that leads to the 2008 crisis. And to a certain extent, it's fascinating to see that from 2000 to 2015, you have the emergence of all these apps. And when you think about what an app is, it's a personalized service to serve you. So you choose a different app than I do. So the standardization that you had in the 1980s, 1990s disappeared towards a personalization type of thing. And then after the 2008 crisis, you see a lot of populism arriving. People can choose to be only fed with a certain type of information that will somehow reinforce their truth. And then you get into an hyper specialization of services. Now, I wouldn't be very honest into answering your question, Mihaila, if I didn't say that there is an element of mistruth in all this, which has been made evident by COVID, which is, like most people working in tech, I probably have 7 laptops at home and a number of telephones and, all that. And then during COVID, I was incredibly surprised to learn that even in rich markets, or so-called rich markets, most people don't have any laptop. Actually, 50% of the population does not have any hardware that allows them to do digital, which basically means that there is a huge business opportunity, which is to serve the other half of the population that cannot have access to those services because they don't have the hardware, but also a social recognition that you have not yet completely bridged this idea that everybody should have access to those digital services. And that's probably the big opportunity for the 2020s, 2030s, where if you look in emerging markets, for instance, Johan mentioned that 2.8 billion people don't have access to the internet, which is absolutely true. Now, what you probably don't know, Johan, is that if you take, for instance, the markets where Vodafone is active in Africa, which is pretty much the entire east coast of the continent, but about 50% of the population already has coverage in 4G and 5G, but only 10% of the population can have access to the services brought there because they don't have the digital devices that would give them access to these things. So again, if you make the layer, the first period, first of 20 years is really about radio waves. It's about bringing the networks, and that has continued through. Then it's about the services, and then strangely enough, everybody forgot the devices. So, I think today the biggest digital opportunity will be whoever cracks the possibility of bringing leasing solutions for digital devices for people, because then the vast majority of the population will finally have access to those development services.
No, I think you bring up a crucial point there, and this idea of a usage gap, and I really want to come back to that because I agree, and I think a lot of the development community is also really starting to wake up to the fact that there is a huge usage gap. We've invested a lot in the signal, in that infrastructure, but now we need to get it into people's hands in order for it to actually translate into growth and opportunities and ultimately poverty reduction. But I wanted to just take us a little bit back here to define a few concepts for our listeners before we launch into more deeply. So, how do you define kind of digitalization as a concept, and also the ICT industry, because I think particularly, both of those concepts can be quite nebulous. We throw them around, I think, in social media, in the regular media, and at work. But sometimes it's helpful to get a bit of specification on that before we kind of launch into it.
So I suppose that the theoretical definition of what is the ICT industry is whichever companies, organizations, or people are involved into delivering services via a technology mean. Now that is very nebulous, as you say. So I tend to prefer the definition that you see, which is the difference between what is visible versus what is less visible, the iceberg, if you want, version of the industry. So there are very recurrent stats showing that if you have 1,000 employees directly in a telecom company, for instance, you will probably have about 10,000 people working into the suppliers of that telecom company. So that's 11,000. And then you will probably have 100,000 people working in the industries that are enabled by whatever is supplied by this equipment. So in total, that's the right way to look at it, because when you start looking at it from a development angle or from a political angle, the real take is to say, what is your multiplier effect? And that is essentially what makes digital so important. There is, to my knowledge, absolutely no other way to deliver development as fast and at as much scale in the world. Full stop. Once you know that, you understand why it should be priority number one for any authority, funder, organization. Just because, yes, you can sell, I don't know, this glass of water to the person next door in this hotel. But, if you can digitize an experience, you can literally, from any remote village in the Alps, sell something on a global scale. And that makes an entire difference. It used to be, especially in poorer markets, that people had to go to the capital city if they wanted to sell something and therefore make a living. It used to be that you had to rent an office. It used to be that you had to have somebody into that office. Then people realized that their van or their tuk-tuk or their bicycle could be their office, provided they had a mobile phone signal. And so, again, there is a multiplier effect at the same time as there is an effect of bringing costs down, which creates miracles. Again, nothing can be compared, I think, to the idea of, 10,000 job or 1,000 job will create a 10,000 indirect job and 100,000 indirect, if you want, which is a lot.
So you just sort of described this in general, but I want to take us to the different kind of high income versus low income versus more fragile states. Because when you said that, Vodafone coverage, 80% of people could have had access to 4G and 5G, but only 10% had the devices to actually access that service, let's say, I immediately wondered, how does that vary overall by the kind of country you're in? And from your experience on the ground, for example, we know that 1/3 of the population globally doesn't have access to digital services, but if you're looking at very poor countries like low-income countries or fragile countries, then it's only 1/3 of that population that has access. So the distribution of this access varies tremendously. And it's one thing to say, to describe them in general, as low-income countries or fragile countries. I would love to hear your perspective from on the ground. What does that look like to you? What does fragility in these places look like to you? So just help us get that picture.
Well, again, if you start from theory to practice, I think fragility is fairly well defined. In my head, fragility is any place where the risk is that, if you say that the trajectory of mankind somehow would be to go from poverty to low middle class to high middle class and into wealth, in all theory, any stage at which a significant proportion of the population is at risk of going back from where they currently are is fragile. And that makes it a very wide definition, because in reality that probably involves as much as a large majority of so-called developing markets, but also a significant minority into the so-called rich markets. So that's the first element to consider. Then, if I have to specify that I speak here in my personal capacity, not in Vodafone, as I don't work for Vodafone anymore. But then again, the same type of rule is applicable, Mihaela, for all telecom industries around the world, which is COVID has had an incredible effect on the knowledge people have, or the ICT industry has gained from societies, much deeper than before, because essentially we kept the lights on. Nobody else was able to keep activities on. And so whether you liked it or not, you gathered data points in a way that you had never done before about what works and what doesn't work. One of the big things that has been identified by this is that beyond talk, which is, a 2G, I don't know if you know the basic rules of radio, but, the 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G essentially is a space type of element, which is in 2G you have a very large coverage, but you have somehow a very slow signal. So you can talk, but you can't do a video call like the one we have. In 3G you will have a smaller coverage environment, but you will have somehow more speed, but still not enough to actually have a video. And to be fair, we thought it was enough. We thought that because of smart coding and all of blah, 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 it would work fantastically well. But COVID has proven that it doesn't. So if you do not have 4G or 5G, none of the super advanced services requiring a lot of data transmission, in the video call we're having, 96% of the data transmission happening is for the image. So the simplest way, if the image starts being blurry, is to shut down the video, because all of a sudden you get back to anything. But if you start having, talking about stuff that is really important, like mobile education or mobile medicine or things like that, you can't lose the signal. Or people are not going to trust their doctor if all of a sudden the image of the doctor gets frozen, or if it disappears. So you need to have stability, permanence in what is offered. And that's a combination of signal, devices, and the quality of the service that's being offered, which is different from company to company. Now, again, during COVID, we realized first big learning was if you do not have a strong quality signal in 4G or 5G, none of these advanced services actually are reliable as far as people are concerned. To put it in a different way, they are today fantastic digital services to help your kids learn better at school. So, to a certain extent, if you are in a fragile state, or if you are in any state, and you say that the way, the math teacher is not teaching your kids is not good enough as far as you are concerned, that specific year, which can happen. Bad teacher, bad program, kid not listening that year, whatever it is, it just doesn't work. Well, there are fantastic programs allowing you to compensate for that via digital. But if these entire elements, so the signal, the device, the service, are not fantastic, people will not buy the service because they can't trust it. And that's the key point, I think, where I'm getting at pretty much every day, which is we need to build full ecosystems. We need to think about these questions as full ecosystems. A lot of organizations have been focusing mostly on delivering infrastructure. There is, it's very common in public services that the Minister of Telecom is originally the Minister of Roads because it's seen as another road. It's carrying signals. And then it goes towards media or content or education as the signal goes up. It's the same in public organization, in multilaterals, which is, in reality, people think, okay, if we put the roads, then the cars will drive. Well, reality is a bit different in telecoms, which is, yes, the infrastructure is good, but you then need to have the training, you need to have the capability of using it, you need to have the service, you need to have the device. So they are, I've coined the what I call the symphony of the 5 layers. So you basically need to have the infrastructure, which is your fiber optics, your towers, whatever links between them. Then you need your energy, possibly green, to power it all. Then you need your devices to be able to see the service. Then you need platforms so that everybody around a given country can have exactly the same service. That is extremely important politically. We can come back on that. But if you make differences between what the people in the big cities and the people in rural areas get, you create political problems moving forward. So you're not delivering development. So you need to make sure that these platforms are scalable enough that they can deliver exactly the same thing throughout countries. And then, of course, you need the data centers to host all of this. As we've all seen recently, sea cables can be shut down, can be cut, can be by pure accident or less accident, but they can be damaged. You need to be able to host many, many things locally so that people can keep access. Again, it's all about trust. It's all about the possibility of maintaining the service no matter what.
Here several fantastically interesting things. I think one thing that stands out to me, and I think we don't talk enough about, is that you need that 4 and 5G level of service and a good signal to really be able to leverage all of these tools that we take for granted. And I think that is not understood by enough people in places like those we live in. So that's worth really pondering. But I wanted to pick up perhaps on this idea of giving everyone the same service, because it feeds a bit into societal fragility, and you touched on it a little bit there. So could you perhaps go a bit deeper into that and give us a sense of how you think ICT industry and digitalization can help counter fragility in societies, both from this kind of political aspect, but also from how you defined it in terms of the economic trajectory that we hope to put countries and populations on?
Certainly. I think, look, the first point to mention is that digital technology has a flattening effect, which is it doesn't matter if you are in a camp like Kakuma in Kenya or if in the middle of New York City. If you get access to the service on something, and of course you need to have the right space to be able to concentrate and all that. None of that is a given. But plain reality is, if you give access to 2 kids in very different conditions to the same educational service, for instance, or medical service, for instance, they will get the same benefit, more or less. So that's the first element, which is, I attended the Fragility conference a few weeks back, and I was very impressed by the testimony given by an ex-refugee, Mary. I have unfortunately forgotten her surname, but who explained how the possibility or the belief she would have the possibility of getting a similar style of education in the camp where she grew up, as if she had been somewhere else, kept pushing her. Because it meant that she was not in a fragile state. She was currently in a fragile state. And that would change because she had hope. And I think, it seems, I'm sorry to do a bit of philosophy, but truly, if people have this view that thanks to technology, they will be fed, they will be educated, they will be cured. The simple fact of knowing it's there somewhere really helps. My ex-company Vodafone has a fantastic agreement with World Food Programme, for instance, where instead of having people rioting literally to get access to food when it comes on truck. Well, you get given a mobile phone, and then this mobile phone will tell you, well, your package of food will be at gate 75 at 10:15. So come there, and nobody else is going to pick it up because you need the code that you have here plus the face recognition coming from your phone. Well, believe it or not, about 14 million people are fed this way every day. And that is, again, unique when you see the types of catastrophes that human catastrophes that we see around the world. The simple fact of knowing that they will, having received the reassurance that there will be food for your family tomorrow, that in itself eliminates a large chunk of your stress. So there is to start with, there is a very basic needs supply type of element due to digital. The same goes into, I spoke with myriads of associations who do development, and very often they have to bring cash. So they transfer billions of dollars in cash into dangerous areas, which when you think about it, I wouldn't do that in London where I live. And so why would you do it in a dangerous area? Especially knowing that if you digitize the whole lot, most of the money, when you digitize an ecosystem, stays about 80% to 85% of it stays digital all the time, because it just exchanges itself via digital. And so all of a sudden it gets much safer. So again, you can make an area that is by all means problematic at a given point in time immediately less problematic in the way that day-to-day life is happening there. And again, that allows you to free your mind somehow from a number of things. And then comes the development point that you had, which is, if, and I really have to insist, if you make digital development at scale, I'm a big opponent to the window dressing of changing 3 schools and then pretending that we've digitized the country. That is, I'm not going to use a bad language word on this podcast, but that drives me nuts, frankly. Because, again, when you make an exercise, you need to know what you're actually trying to achieve. So if you want to change a number of, the education system, the first thing you need to know is how many schools do you have? Then you need to know if they have electricity. Then you need to know if you could bring equipment without that equipment being stolen. And then you need to know who do you need to talk to so that it doesn't get stolen. Then you need to train the people, and then you need to make it work. And so I think, the deep answer to your vast question, sorry, I could talk about that for 5 hours, to your vast question is that the first thing digital can do is to help whoever is organizing the improvement of things, defining what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Is it a basic safety problem? Well, maybe that digitizing will help you eliminating the safety problem. Is it a basic needs problem like food? Then maybe that digitizing will help this. Is it a more advanced thing, which is like medical for large chunks of population, or education, or financial services, or whatever? Well, again, it will help you defining the problem. So one of the things I would really invite governments or international organizations to do a bit more is to work with the ICT industry to identify what is it in a given context that people are trying to achieve. And then there you will see a need in equipment, a need in devices, a need in services, a need in coverage, a need in whatever. In my life, when I was a janitor, I negotiated the fact of not having people shooting at the antennas. Because yes, the antennas were helping the other guy, but they were also helping this side. So both sides ended up agreeing that it was better not to shoot at the antenna. Once you had achieved that, then you knew that you could bring development services of which everybody would benefit. And yes, there is a difficult discussion to be had with factions at some stage to say, yes, it means we will also educate the other side. But so what? You benefit, they benefit. You might not agree, but everybody benefits. So it's a plus. And frankly, once you start not doing politics and getting clearly only into objects, what is it that you're trying to solve? in my experience, and I've only worked in 100 plus countries, in my experience, people do talk pacifically about that. Because once they understand that this is going to be a plus for whoever there is, you've eliminated somehow a large chunk of the fragility element, which is the conflict sustaining it. Because you're not part of it, you're a solution.
So I want to talk more about shooting at antennas and leaving the politics aside, because you have so much experience that it would be incredibly valuable if you can walk us through how you build that business case in fragile states or in low-income countries, or even more specifically in conflict areas. And I'm thinking now externally, how do you engage the government partners? What are the obstacles? But then also internally, how do you convince your shareholders that it's worth being there, even if you might take a little bit of a cut in the short term? So help us see that construction of the business case and the obstacles that you're encountering.
Sure. I think three streams of thoughts that have to be articulated together. The first one is basic economics, which is, if you're based in the US, you pay your average telecom package, let's call it that way, an average of 4 times more than what you would pay in Europe. If you're in Africa, you pay it 4 times less than what you would pay it in Europe. So the profitability of telecom activities, the North America tends to prefer all-you-can-eat type of solutions. So you get bigger and bigger packages costing more and more, based on the premise that if you really wanted to do 6 video calls in parallel whilst watching 7 movies, you could do that without killing your package. I always have a bit of difficulties to understand that completely, and I have 3 kids, so I do understand multiple sessions and the need to have very strong Wi-Fi in the house. But plain reality is that the packages are much bigger on the North American side. Profitability is therefore much higher too, because the network is the same. You still need, of course, it's a bit more. If people are doing video calls all the time, you will have to have a reinforced network by definition on capacity. But in the main, if you know that you need to cover a place before you can sell something, by definition, you need to cover that place. Which brings you to your first hurdle internally, which is when you present a case for a lower income market, your board of directors or management committee will know immediately that the profitability you can expect from those services is lower. Then 2 things happen. The first thing is that, every business is managed based on a set of risk assessments. So people have different tolerance to risk depending on companies. So the first thing is to say, well, certain ICT companies are more inclined to go to more complicated countries than others. Then you need to understand why, and you need to tackle that. Which is where the partnership part comes in, where, believe it or not, when you have a multilateral proposing to join you on a business, that reassures private investors. Because they say, well, development agencies, for instance, are there to help these markets, but they're not fools either. So if they come on something, they must be seeing that, in the long run, it's a plus. So partnership. I love partnerships. They allow to de-risk things. Usually, something that you might not want to do alone, you might be accepting to do if you know that your friend is doing with you, because you hold the hand of each other and it's better. So I've coined this belief that the entire industry needs to do recurrent partnerships with a select number of people they trust. So it's not about multiplying partnerships all the time, because otherwise it becomes a cacophony. You can't manage millions of partners. But if you have a small number of people of which you understand the risk level, appetite, the type of conditions they care about, what they want to see, then you can do repeat business with them. And that really brings down the heart rate of the people on your management team or on your board, because they go, oh, we're doing this again with XYZ. last time it worked well, so very, very good. So that's the second part. Then the third part is on the business plan itself, which is most business cases of the first 20 years of our industry were based on put an antenna, put voice, and then maybe you'll sell a bit of data. That's basically what it was. Then the next 20 years were, now data is going up, so put a lot of data because people want to serve the internet. And then apps came, and then it was, they don't want to serve the internet, they want to have services associated to their specific needs, etc. But generally speaking, in richer markets, what happened is that the thinking behind business casing went from voice to data. What it didn't go really through was into social development. And that's where emerging markets have a fantastic opportunity. Because it's difficult, I don't know, just for the sake of argument, I'm in France, it's difficult to go and say, you know what, I'm going to make a business case by which I'm going to supplement the French education system because really it needs a level up. Maybe it does, but it's difficult to sell internally because people immediately will say, come on, this is a G7 country. They must have a decent education system. Whether they know it or don't know it doesn't matter. The immediate reaction will be there. However, when you talk to the authorities of emerging markets, very often they will be very open about saying, my education system is not good, or my medical system would be much better if I could digitize it, or is there something you can do to improve the lives of my farmers because really they are super important to me, or etc., etc. And a typical case is this partnership we did in Ethiopia, which sums it all up. Ethiopia is a complex country by all shape and belief. It's very, very large. It's 4 times the UK and Ireland. It's a very large territory. It has a population of 120 million people. It has had problems in the past. So all of a sudden, not the easiest business case you can sell immediately. However, when the authorities called the majors to say, hey, would you like to bid for a license? They immediately indicated, we have a social development plan where we want to change 5 verticals. And interestingly enough, those verticals were very related to SDGs. There was this aspiration of making the country a better place. As a country, a very, very strong push to say, we don't want different services in different regions. We want all Ethiopians to have the same services. 78% of our populations are farmers. If we could improve the life of these people, it would be great. What can you do on the mobile agriculture? And the interesting data point for you to bring to your listeners is that if we had done, so we formed a gigantic consortium to work on this opportunity. If we had done a business case based on only voice, we would probably have been able to invest 4 times less than what we are actually investing today because we have other revenue streams to count on. So that's the third big part. I need to add one element, which is obviously regulation. Governments very rarely assess how important it is to have a referee in a market. Everywhere around the world where I go, I see the same trend where people say, come on, this can't be that important. Well, it is. There is a very big difference between making a business plan for 5 years and making a business plan for 30 years. That's the first thing. So you can make these licenses long. But also, if for instance, the government tells you, we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that competition is open, that nobody is advantaged, then every day you need to have a strong referee you can call and say, I'm seeing this. This is not very good. Because investors are easily impressible somehow, so they will be frightened if something does not happen the way it was supposed to happen. The next time you go and ask for money to do more, because you say, I've just seen this opportunity, they want to launch, a digital school for all the kids. People might say, yeah, but when they said that there would be no discrimination on mobile money, we've seen a bit of discrimination on mobile money. So are you sure we should do this, or should we wait for a while? So I think stability is the probably the fourth factor that comes in underlay to everything, and that's where the authorities and institutions come together, because you can make very, very objective assessments of saying, you know what, we've seen governments trying this in 10 countries and that in 10 countries, and the second solution works best. So objectivizing facts is really, really important. If you put all these conditions together, then all of a sudden you have de-risked your market, you have, because you know where you're heading, you have strong partners, so you know that, if something happens, you will be able to club. You're not going to be alone. You have a strong business case and you stick to this, and you have authorities that help you making it happen. Frankly, then it's much easier to work in more complicated countries, and therefore you can help them more. I'm not going to tell you, Mihaela, that this is a piece of cake convincing people. It is not, but it's doable and it's well worth it. As I said before, I'm delighted that we've been able to change the world. I'm delighted that we're every day carrying on as an industry changing the world. If you think about it, very few industries have had so much change effect in the world, and it's fantastic. So we need to carry on that, adapting it to the problems of today, which is, devices and services essentially rather than infrastructure.
So you alluded to this a bit in terms of the government having a development plan, having specific verticals, also the government being, a driver behind regulation, hopefully through not partially themselves, but also an independent regulator somehow that has an arm's length distance. But I wondered if you could just go a bit more into the benefits that governments can draw from digitalization, both as it relates to society, which you've covered a little bit already, but also in terms of their own operations, and then being able to do what they do better.
Look, it would be a bit awkward for me to have my suit on. Normally, I have an SDG badge on my suit. Now, in the Alps, it looks a bit bizarre if you ski in a suit. So I won't go there. But joke aside, all governments on the planet have agreed to what are called Sustainable Development Goals. All of them are monitored every year. And again, from my modest knowledge of interaction of governments, nobody likes to be told that they are not doing well. Now, if you then look at the mechanics of things, 70% of all the SDGs can be achieved or will be achieved via digital, one way or another. There is always a significant component or an absolutely necessary component that comes from digital. So the first answer is, if you, as whatever your political inclination, have committed to deliver certain social development goals in your country and you want to deliver them, digital is your best bet. Full stop. So that's that. Then we've made an exercise with our consortium about 4 years ago, which was to say, okay, let's stop kidding ourselves. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. How many of them do we actually have an impact on? Everybody goes 70%, blah, 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 all of them, etc. Plain reality is that 8 of them, and don't ask me to list them by memory, but 8 of them are only achieved by digital. So they're not just contributing, they are digitally driven. So again, if you put these 2 data points together, it seems to me like a pretty no-brainer somehow. But then it comes to the real brainer question, Johan, which is money. Somebody much more intelligent than me actually has studied that in order to deliver what is required on the digital development front, you need to invest $418 billion per year during the next 10 years. The ICT industry in general, so that's all the club of companies working in that, generates investable $200 billion per year. So when you start eliminating your own costs, etc., there are 200 billion that can be put to help on these goals. So you have a gap of 218 billion per year. Now, the interesting bit is that organizations, if I remember well, just taking the 10 largest ones around the world have investment budgets in this sector, or possible bringing to this sector, of about 150 billion per year. So if we could combine private money and institution money and dedicate it to digital development, well, you've achieved to 350 something. So that's not bad at all. You're still not at your 418, but you've still achieved quite a large chunk of what you want. So what I'm saying here is that if I was a government, if I was any sort of politician, and I'm not making a call to anybody, but development is my passion, I want to make it happen. Frankly, I would scream at the low level of actual disbursement that is happening from private sector and public institutions at the same time. We are just not doing enough to deliver what we say we all collectively want to deliver. And the money is there. That's the key point I want to really imprint, which is it's not a question of, oh, but we're short of it, we can't do it, come back in 10 years. No, the money is there. It's just not being spent. Which then leads to my, other passion in life, which is plumbing. At the end of the day, I've spent the last 5 years with my team trying to figure out why is it, Mihaela, you asked what makes a board of directors click in such a way that they will trust you. And the answer is time. If they know that the time is sufficiently long, then yes, you can take a higher risk. Because everybody knows that you can have a bumpy ride. But if you know you're there for the long term, you will be much more at ease taking risk in the short term. On the public side, what I can see is that everybody wants to protect themselves. To a certain extent, I know it's not very nice of saying it that way, but very often people forget the D in development. All the development finance organizations are development finance organizations, not financial organizations. I think if we can put the D, write it in capital letters, maybe with a font that is 10 times bigger, you might accelerate the way at which files can be accessed. Again, I'm always flabbergasted to see, I've spoken about the 5 pillars of digital development. The files in these 5 pillars, they're always the same. Country to country, it's always the same thing. So you could do a sausage factory where you go into, okay, hey guys, it's Monday, we have another fiber code to make. What is the best fiber code we've seen in the last 3 years? This one is the one. Where are the contracts? Bring the contracts, make a template, sign here, do it. No, it doesn't work that way. Each of the projects I'm involved in, and that's dozens, you get, let's start at 0. Then let's redraft entirely all the contracts. Let's rebuild the business model. Let's revisit all the risks, and ends up, in Marrakesh last year, Ajay Banga at the World Bank mentioned one data point, which is the World Bank cannot sign an agreement on anything in approximately less than 27 months. And I was smiling, actually laughing in the audience because, the private sector is probably at 24 months. So we're not that better. But if you template it, we've modeled this, we've tried it, and it works. If you template it, if you simplify the thing because it's repeat, then all of a sudden it goes between 9 to 12 months. If you do 9 to 12 months instead of 24 to 27 months, you start disbursing money much faster, and therefore you bring development much faster. So again, if I were the recipient of this, I would scream, because I would basically go into, guys, it's not about inventing another plan or about saying that we need to reinvent the wheel. It's just about accelerating what we are already doing. And the worst part, Johan and Mihaela, is that everybody agrees. We're just not collectively doing it. So that's my wake-up call to everybody, which is, stop complexifying these things. They are the same in every country. In every country, go into, okay, I want to change the medical system. That's this many medical points. How much does it cost per medical point? How much does it cost for the transmission? How much does it cost for whatever, blah, 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 the platform, etc. Boom, I have this much. Okay, where is the last model we used? Did we face any problem with that model last time? Usually no. How many people read? These agreements are sometimes thousands of pages long. I don't know about you, but I have zero pleasure going back into 1,000 pages agreement. So basically, I can guarantee you that nobody in the industry ever goes back to these agreements, which then ask you, why do we sign them? Why do we spend month and month and month negotiating stuff that ultimately will not make a difference? It's the delivery that makes a difference. So we need to accelerate the delivery.
So this took us to exactly where I want to talk about. I want to talk about obstacles, So you mentioned the lack of standardization and templates, the need for everyone in this whole chain to cover their own risks, let's say, so I don't use a different word. Can we talk about what are some of the other obstacles? We have low level of disbursement. We know what we need to do, but especially in focus, please, if you can, in low income countries, fragile states maybe, but lower middle income, where you have also a few more obstacles from the government side, from the governance side. Tell us, in terms of the closing this digital divide, what do you see as the biggest obstacles, and which ones sort of make you think, okay, we don't have a solution to, or do we have solutions, we're just not doing them?
Complex question. Let me bring you back to when I joined Vodafone. I remember the first question that was asked to me by the then CEO, which was, should I invest into that country? And my answer was, based on what? Then that led to, he said, very good answer, then we ended up building a model. Now, you've asked, do we have the solutions and do we not apply them, or do we not have the solutions and we need to create them? The answer is a bit of both. There are fantastic models already created by organizations. Fantastic. I mean, I really mean that. The data points, the intellect, the capabilities that you see in these organizations are fantastic. Why is it that we don't use benchmark more is beyond my understanding. I do know we, the three of us, are from different nationalities, probably multiple different nationalities as well. Plain reality is that I've never heard anybody telling me that his country is no different than the country next door. All of us believe that our countries are fundamentally different than anything else. And it's not true. It's just simply not true. My humble belief from experience is that a medium-sized country of a certain level of development will behave exactly the same way as another middle-sized country of that same level of development at a given point in time. And hence will face the same risks, the same opportunities, the same problems in general, and the same solutions. Now, which goes back to your question. If you objectively agree to categorize your country, are you a small, medium, large country? Are you in this phase of development? I mentioned poverty, low middle income, high middle income, etc. Where are you objectively? And then based on that, would you be interested in solution X, in solution Y, or in solution Z? One of the I'm sorry, I'm using education again, but it's another of my passions. I always find it fascinating to hear people start, when they talk about digital education, the immediate first reaction you have is, oh, but our curriculum is so specific. And the answer is no. Your linguistic curriculum is usually very specific, but the fact that you teach math in a different way than somebody else, it's still the same math. So in reality, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter so long that the kids have access to great education of math. Which means that, very often I see countries, especially in problematic setups, freezing on what are essentially side problems. And I don't want to make it a negative statement. It's actually a positive statement. People want the best for the kids, so they will go into, but are you sure that this is not going to endanger the kids? But if organizations, for instance, could say, we've seen this product being implemented in those 5 comparable countries to you, and so far the results are overwhelmingly positive, you would eliminate again maybe a year or 2 years of discussions about whether yes or no this is a good idea. So I think, again, it's a bit of both. There are some certain solutions on the intellectual side. You then need to localize them, and that is never done in advance. It can't be done in advance. But if it can be itself objectivized, if you can have a model saying, each time you want to digitize the medical service of a country of this type of level, these are the 10 points you need to get right. Well, if you do that, you can do that much faster. And again, you can use digital to actually make it happen. We saw it again during COVID. COVID is a recurrent theme of mine, where all of a sudden people could not send inspectors. So they gave local people phones. You could not send the myriads of people employed by myriads organizations to go and see on the ground. But you can replace that by a video. You can ask a mother in a village to say, look, I want to see how the hospital is going. Send me a picture every morning. That will tell you a lot about what's going on, And so again, you can use digital to help bringing more digital, is what I'm trying to say. You can use the benchmark that already exists to objectivize the debates, and then you can gain some time.
That is a very important and applicable flywheel that you've outlined for us, I think. And as we're moving, I think, a bit towards the end of this fascinating conversation, as you mentioned earlier, we could probably go on for 5 hours. But there are a few topics we wanted to just explore. First, perhaps one thing that we do think is very important when it comes to digitalization and also in this age of when artificial intelligence is becoming more and more prevalent across society, is obviously the risks, the downside risks that this comes with. How do you think about the issues and challenges and risks to society from rolling out digitalization, and potentially also within that how they're exacerbated or mitigated perhaps by artificial intelligence?
Very, very good question, very difficult question. My crystal ball is unfortunately stayed in London in my office, but listen, I think I'm a techie. I was convinced since teenage years or student years that technology would help the world, and in the main it has. So I always try to stay objective. Yes, of course, many much more intelligent people than me have indicated that if it's not being controlled, AI creates a risk of destroying us all. Yes, it is. That's for sure. But to a certain extent, I remember Victorians indicating that the train would kill people because you couldn't go faster than the horse without dying immediately. And it didn't happen, right? I remember people saying that, mobile phones coming through would destroy society because people would, in the main, not communicate together. And frankly, has that happened? Not at all. It had brought people much closer together, even when they are geographically distant, which was something that was not possible before. So all that to say that my starting point is always to be positive. My second point is always to have a decent laugh at the achievements of stuff. Years ago, I was interviewed by, I won't say which regime, but it was a fairly strong regime, who basically asked me if what you saw in Fast and Furious, which is a beautiful terrorist killing people by taking control of their cars in New York City from her plane, was possible. And at the time, the only thing I could reply is, sir, so far we can ignite the engine at distance, but frankly, the gearbox is just too difficult. Now, 15 years down the line, of course, if you take a fully automated digital car, you might probably be able to make it move, etc. That being said, can you really control 500 cars and make them chase the hero at distance from your plane that is flying at 5,000 or 500 kilometers an hour? No. So it's quite fascinating to when you start looking at things with a bit of distance. I don't know if you've noticed, but every conference you can go to this year is now about AI end. So the same one that was about machine learning is now about AI. And then plain reality is that it's really the beginning of the beginning of the beginning of something. I was in a conference the other day about AI being used in development contracts, because there is, again, how do you do these templates? Well, probably by asking a robot to pick up the best clauses. And interestingly enough, some of the software that was being demonstrated there was inventing clauses. So you would ask him, read those 5 contracts and find me the best of the 5, and they would invent the 6th one. Now, there is nothing wrong as such with it, but it just tells you how little we know about all this from now. If you ask me, quantum computing has a much more transformational aspect because of its capability of looking at different states of things simultaneously than AI currently has. Yet I don't see anybody panicking in the media saying, "Oh, quantum computing is going to kill us." No. I think, look, these are societal technology evolutions. We need to understand them. And I hope I've been clear about that throughout this podcast, which is that at the end of the day, that is really the crux, which is around the world, people are facing more or less the same issues, but not exactly the same issues, because those depend on where you are, in which stage of development you are, etc., etc. And we need to use the technology we have to first and foremost understand things well. What is it that you are trying to do? What is it that will have the most important effect? Because of the finite nature of money, no organization has enough. I've said it today. You have 200 billion missing per year. Even if you could mobilize all the money available from the biggest DFI, you would still need bridge the gap. So you need to make choices. These choices are the crux. It's if we start having, everybody needs to have fiber optics. Why? If the average Joe in any society uses 50 megabit per second very, very happily, why do you need to have 500 megabits per second? Maybe 1% of the population needs that. But then why would you put most of the money into creating that instead of having a slower, but maybe cheaper and more adapted solution for that given market at that given point in time? So it's the same logic I apply here, which is, I believe that, AI, quantum computing, etc., will allow us to solve problems that we have not been able to solve before. I also believe that they will come with dangers, and that we need to understand these dangers, see how they affect each society locally, and then put the limits. It goes back to that referee you have, which is, and yes, I hear some of the tech gurus saying, "Oh, but they don't understand what we're doing, so how could they regulate it?" Nah, at the end of the day, they do understand very much their populations. That's usually why they have been elected. They do understand what are the day-to-day things that affect people, which allows me to finish this point on a study my previous company, Orange, did probably 15 or 17 years ago. In 150 countries, they asked people, by the way, what do you use your phone for? And the answer came as in 80% of all the calls in every single country at exactly the same time go to the same people. We all call our boss to say that we're late in the morning. We all call the dentist at 11 a.m., whatever, when we have a coffee break. We all call our partner to say that you're going to be late for dinner. We all call our mother on Sunday, or whatever it is. But the key point is, if you want an argument onto we all are humans, is that one, which is, at the end of the day, everybody was calling the same people at the same time to say exactly the same things. So I think we need to give credit, no matter what country you're talking about. You need to give credit to the authorities there. They usually understand pretty well what's going on, what are their needs. What needs to happen is to document that probably a bit better in a digital version of it, which is, okay, these are your 10 biggest challenges, sir or madam. Where would digital have the bigger impact? And that's where you invest jointly, and then you make it simple so that it happens faster and faster. I think if we combine these things, the world will be a better place after all.
So you touched upon a couple of points that my question also touches upon. So you talked about the finite nature of money, and I wanted to ask you for two use cases. So think of yourself like low-income country. Where should they put limited financial resources in order to catalyze the development of an ICT industry? And then on the DFI side, what should they do also with their limited resources if there's like one or two things on each side?
Human societies usually are, we just touched on the fact that we're all the same. And at the end of the day, we all want to have shelter for our families. We want to have food. We want to have education. We want to have medical, and we want to have security. That's usually your big pillars, right? So I guess the answer is, in a low income country, what I would do if I were a decision maker in those countries, I would ask myself, which of these five can I manage myself? Take a simple example, which is security. In most countries, if you have a well-trained police locally, it can manage security. And so you've eliminated one problem, and you don't need to bring money from abroad to do that. Sometimes you do, sometimes you need blue helmets or whatever it is, but in the main, most countries can probably solve that one on their own, provided that they put their resources into that. Conversely, when you look at, let's say medical relies a lot on very expensive kit nowadays to bring to a certain level. That is usually very expensive. I think, typically, therefore, if I was a decision maker in a country, I would probably say, people want to be able to cure their families. Am I capable of solving this myself? And the answer is probably, take your average African countries will have the equivalent of wirelets, so they will have local areas where you can come to see a nurse, and then if that doesn't go, then you go a bit further down and you see a doctor, and then if that doesn't work, then you go a bit further down. Again, some parts of that work can be done at local level, and again, if you can do it yourself, why would you go and do it via somebody else? And that allows to each time somehow funnel the resources of the international community into where is it that this particular country cannot achieve a certain thing on its own. And I think, so it's impossible to answer in theory, I believe, for all countries of a given layer. What you can say is that from my humble experience, small, medium, large countries tend to have different needs, and they tend to have similar types of problems depending on size and development level. So what you can then build is international community can say, okay, it seems that all the middle income countries of this size have a problem with the education reform. Why don't we help them on the digitized front? And that's where you go into very intricate questions of supply chain, which is, if we collectively went into saying, instead of buying a piecemeal digital school, let's say, will cost you $10,000 for 25 tablets, a VSAT antenna, and the programs that go on it. But let's say that we started shipping these things by the ton. Well, maybe you can bring the cost of it to 5,000. And then all of a sudden you can do much more. Maybe that if you use the expert supply chain people from big organizations, you could bring, quality, price, support, etc. down again. And so again, it goes back to this thing about, it's not about pretending you're doing something. It's about planning to do it at scale and select really where it is. So if I'm the local government, I would think, to answer your question, what can I do myself? What can I objectively not do myself? And ask help there. If I'm the international community, I'm saying, let's stop believing that they need help on everything, because that might be true. But plain reality is that there are many, many countries that are capable of handling of those 5 needs, maybe 2 or 3 on their own. Let's focus on this. That is what has been done very, very well on infrastructure for the last 15 years. What I'm saying now is that it's probably time to change tack a bit, because infrastructure in the main is happening. People have seen that roads can be built. People have seen that train tracks can be built. People have seen that telecom networks can be built. And therefore, they are putting money into this, and it's happening. It still needs a bit of push, a bit of insurance for MEGA, for instance, and things like that, but still it's happening. On the other layers of my 5 pillars of digital, it's not happening that fast. So it's probably where we need to focus on collectively there.
And so to kind of wrap this up as a last question, I know that you are in your new role as this Libro non-executive board director. One of the key focus and passions of yours is in ICT industry on a global level. So wanted to take the opportunity as our last kind of question to you to give us a bit of a vision of what should a global ICT industry look like that benefits low and middle income countries, that helps develop the services, that creates the incentive to roll out the devices, that helps develop the skills in financial sustainable ways that we need for these industries to work, and then that links it all back together. So obviously very small question, but over to you to paint with a broad brush for us what this could look like.
You've just answered the question yourself by, no, joke aside, if we deliver the 5 pillars, magic happens. So that's the first thing. That implies to accept that there are 5 pillars, not 1, not 2, not 3, 5. And they need to all come together. So you basically need to defocus from one pillar, which is what people have focused on, which is infrastructure, to the full ecosystem. And accept that, yes, if you put a data center in California and ask all African markets to go and fetch information there, the quality of the stuff will never be as good as if you can bring it locally. Which implies that, yes, financial institutions will have to accept that to take the risk of putting them in those countries, because that's where they're useful. And so first is, in my vision, would be first is a defocus from each of the pillars by different organization to this common understanding that there are 5 pillars and not 4, 5. So that's the first thing. Second part, again, in this process of elimination, as I answer to Michaile's question, which is to really wonder objectively what is happening well and what is not happening well. Again, scale is what matters. It's not about having a pet project, something that happens once. It's replicability. You need to be able to churn these things like sausages in a factory. Because otherwise, you never achieve enough to satisfy the needs of human development. So I think you said yourself earlier that if I remember well, about 60% of the total population of the planet is either in a fragile state or in a country at risk of becoming in a fragile state, or a country affected by a country in a fragile state, like neighborhood nations, etc. That makes it a vast call for action. So in terms of vision, again, is stop talking, do it. We need to collectively stop talking and do it. There are so many summits where everybody goes into, but we need to do it. We need to increase it. Let's talk about increasing it. Let's meet again in 6 months' time. No, list the projects objectively that need to be done. Talk with people about how it should be done, and then do it. I'm going to enjoy myself giving you a little publicity break. It's a non-profit thing that I've created with friends. It's called Global Partners for Digital Development. Whoever wants to join us, discuss with us, etc., is most welcome to do that. I am absolutely convinced that there are so many brilliant minds out there. There are so many people who want to do good. like the two of you. There are so many people who are involved in development, not because that's what pays them, but because that's what they feel needs to be done. Well, we've created a digital tent where we tell people, come and exchange their stories. Come and exchange how you overcame the fact of creating a data center in a country of this layer, because that country of the same layer requires a data center as well, and they don't know how to. So help us out. This thing is nicely growing, very under radar type of thing. What we want to do is to help doing these templates, help doing these listing of things that need to be done, and then propose them to investors. Including the investors I work with. To be fair, there is no reason they would be deprived of it. But there is a fundamental need to exchange information about these things a bit more. And to exchange information in a way that actually talks to people, which is, no, it's not about, I want to digitize education of country number 13 in your list. Is, hey, by the way, I have 32,577 schools to digitize. The cost per school is this much. Anybody game? And I am absolutely convinced that there is a lot of people who would be interested if you presented it that way. Because if you are a manufacturer of digital equipment for schools, why would you not want to be participating to this? Now, you might say, country number 12 there, it's a bit risky for me, but then you can call Miga and say, hey, by the way, can you guarantee that these guys will not lose their equipment if they actually take the risk of coming? And I've seen it happening over and over again. It does work. What I hope is that we are going to collectively make it faster. And so I'm sorry, it's not a vast vision, crystal ball type of thing. It's a Nike slogan of just do it and share information, please.
I think, to be honest, that's all we need. It's less about the vision. It's kind of there. We have a common understanding, as you've outlined, and now it's time to get to action. Where could people find more info about this global partnership for digital development, and how could they get involved if they were curious?
So I suppose they could just send me a WhatsApp or an email is usually the easiest. There is an information package ready. To be honest, we focused on doing stuff, not really on selling it or showing it or whatever. So the honest answer is there is no real plaquette that is, or slide deck that is visible. But if anybody interested, send them my way. I'd be delighted to have a conversation.
We will do so, and thank you so much, Philippe, for this conversation. It's been truly wonderful. I think we set out with a bold idea of having an in-depth conversation about a topic that is of incredible importance, and I think we've made some real progress towards that goal. So thank you so much for joining us, and to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us again. It's been a pleasure to be able to bring some of these incredible thoughts and insights to you. As always, if you want to hear more, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also please do rate us and follow us on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn at F-World Podcast. Thank you so much again, Philippe, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your time on the slopes.